When my son said, "She's my family now," I nodded my head and smiled. I even told him I understood. But inside, something very old and very fragile broke quietly. He did not shout. He did not argue. He said it calmly, as if it were a simple fact. As if I had already known. We were standing near the door. The same door I once held open for him when he was small. The same door I watched him run through every morning, backpack bouncing, hair still messy from sleep. Now he stood tall, confident,
certain.
and I stood there holding my purse, my coat folded over my arm, feeling smaller than I had in years. "She needs me," he added. "Please understand. Please understand." Those words stayed with me long after he walked away.
I wanted to ask him something.
I wanted to say, "Was I not your family too?" But the question stayed in my throat. I had learned over time that asking for space in someone's heart can make you lose what little space you have left. So I stayed quiet. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The house was still, too still. The clock ticked loudly, like it was counting something I could not stop. I made myself a cup of tea, even though I did not want it. I just wanted to hold something warm. I kept replaying his words in my mind. Not angrily, not bitterly, just slowly. "She's my family now." I wondered when that change had happened. If there had been a moment I missed. A sign I ignored because I was too busy loving him the way I always had. I am not telling this story to blame my son. I am telling it because there are many mothers like me. Women who gave their lives quietly. Women who learn to step back without complaint. Women who smile even when their hearts feel heavy. If you are listening to this, maybe you already know this feeling. The feeling of being needed once and remembered later. This is not a story about anger. It is a story about silence. The kind of silence that grows between a mother and a son when life changes. Faster than the heart can follow. And this is where my story truly begins. Before my son grew into a man with a life of his own, it was just the two of us. His father passed away when my boy was still young. Not suddenly, but slowly. An illness that took pieces of him year by year until there was nothing left to fight. When the funeral ended and the house became quiet, I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, wondering how I would do this alone. Then my son walked in. He climbed up beside me and leaned his head against my shoulder. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll stay with you." He was just a child. But in that moment, he sounded so sure. I worked 2 jobs after that. Nothing fancy. Nothing easy. I woke before the sun and came home after dark. Some nights my feet hurt so badly I sat in the car for a few minutes before going inside. But I never complained. Because every tired day was worth it when I saw him asleep at his desk, books open, dreaming of a future I wanted him to have. Our house was small. The floor creaked when you walked across it. The heater made strange noises in the winter. But it was full of love. We ate dinner together every night, even when it was just soup and bread. I listened to his school stories, his dreams, his worries. I never thought those conversations would end. When he grew older, I tried not to hold on too tightly. I encouraged him to make friends, to travel, to fall in love. I wanted him to have what I lost. So when he told me about her, I smiled. "She makes me happy," he said. "That's all I want," I replied. And I meant it. She was polite at first. Quiet. Careful. She called me Mrs. instead of Mom. And I did not correct her. I did not want to push. I told myself relationships grow slowly. Love needs time. When they married, I helped where I could. I cooked meals. I folded laundry. I stayed out of the way. I thought that was what respect looked like, but I did not know that stepping back too far can make you disappear. At night, after they moved into their own place, I would sit alone and remember the sound of his laughter in the other room. I told myself this was normal. This was life. Children grow. Mothers adjust. That is what we are taught. I never imagined that one day I would be standing at his door, listening to him explain that his family had changed. That I had changed. That my place was no longer where it once was. But back then, in those early days, I still believed love stayed the same, even when lives changed. I did not yet understand how quiet distance can grow without anyone noticing that at first, the changes were so small that I told myself they did not matter. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became less frequent. When I asked how he was doing, he said, "Busy, Mom." And I believed him, because I wanted to. I noticed I was no longer invited the way I once was. Holidays were still being planned. Dinners were maybe next time. I told myself this was marriage, a new rhythm, a new life. But sometimes, late at night, I sat on my bed and wondered when I had become an extra part of the story instead of a chapter. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced. I had baked his favorite bread, the one he loved as a child. When she opened the door, she smiled, but her eyes did not. "Oh," she said softly. "We weren't expecting you. I can come back," I offered quickly. She hesitated. Then she stepped aside. Inside, everything felt different. The house was neat, quiet, not lived in the way ours had been. My son hugged me, but it felt careful, like he was afraid of squeezing too hard. We sat for a few minutes.
We talked about small things.
Then she said, "We were just about to go out." I gathered my purse. "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said. "You didn't," my son replied, but his eyes avoided mine. After that day, I stopped visiting without calling. Then I stopped visiting at all, because no one wants to feel like a surprise they should have announced. Small words began to sting. "She prefers things this way. She's not comfortable with that." We decided together. Each sentence placed a gentle wall between us. I did not push. I did not argue. I told myself love means understanding. But understanding can become loneliness if you are the only one doing it. One evening, we sat at their table. Dinner was quiet.
She talked about plans.
About weekends. About things that did not include me. My son nodded along. I watched him, waiting. He never looked my way. When I got home that night, I stood in my kitchen and cried for the first time in years. Not loudly, just enough to let the ache breathe. I cried for the woman I used to be, for the mother who mattered without asking. I told myself this phase would pass, that time would soften things. But deep down, I felt something shifting, like a door slowly closing, not slammed, but gently pushed until it clicked. And I was standing on the other side. The moment came on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing dramatic. No raised voices. No tears at first. Just words spoken calmly, the way life-changing words often are. My son had asked me to stop by. "Just to talk," he said on the phone. I remember feeling hopeful.
Silly maybe.
But hopeful. I wore my good sweater. The one he once said made me look nice. We sat in their living room. She was there too. Her hands were folded in her lap. His arm rested along the back of the couch, not touching me. He cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "things need to change." I nodded. "I understand," I said, even before I knew what he meant. He spoke carefully. About boundaries. About priorities. About how marriage comes first. I listened. I truly did. Then he said it. "She's my family now." The room went quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just still. I felt my heart pause, not break loudly. Just pause. Like it was waiting to see if he would add something. He didn't, and I looked at him. At the face I had memorized since birth. At the eyes that once searched for me in every crowd. I waited for him to say I was still important. He didn't. "She needs me," he added. "And I need to be there for her." I smiled. Not because I felt okay, but because mothers of my generation were taught to smile through pain. "I understand," I said again. Inside, something shifted. I realized then that I had been slowly moving out of his life for years. And I had helped make it easy by never asking for space. I stood up. "I should go," I said softly. He walked me to the door. He hugged me quickly. Polite. Brief. As if we were distant relatives. When the door closed behind me, I stood on the porch for a moment. I did not cry. I just breathed. And in that breath, I understood something painful and true. Love does not disappear. But sometimes it is reassigned, The days after that conversation felt longer than usual. Morning light came through my curtains, but it did not feel warm. I moved through my home quietly, as if sound itself might remind me of what I had lost. I washed dishes that were already clean. I folded blankets that did not need folding. Keeping busy was easier than thinking. For a while, I replayed everything in my mind. Every word, every pause. I wondered if I had said too much, or not enough. But mostly, I wondered when loving him became something I had to do from a distance. I did not call him. Not out of pride. Out of fear. Fear that my voice would sound too eager. Too hopeful. Fear that he would answer politely, kindly, and briefly. That kind of kindness hurts more than silence. Weeks passed. Then months. Life did what it always does. It moved forward. One afternoon, I found an old box in the closet. Inside were small things: his first drawing, a school photo with his crooked smile, a note he once left on the fridge. "Love you, Mom." I sat on the floor and held that note like it was something fragile. Because it was. That day, I cried again, but differently. Not from shock. From acceptance. I realized something important. I had been waiting for him to remember who I was. But I had forgotten something too. I was still me. A woman. A mother. A whole person. Even without being needed the way I once was. I began to take small steps back into my own life. I walked in the mornings. I joined a book group at the library. I cooked meals just for myself, and I set the table nicely anyway. Because I deserved care too. One evening, the phone rang. It was him. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice sounded unsure. "I was just checking in." I took a breath before answering. "Thank you," I said. "I'm doing okay." And for the first time, I truly meant it. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing heavy. Nothing painful. But something had changed. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I was simply present. I learned that loving someone does not always mean standing close. Sometimes it means stepping back without bitterness. Without closing your heart. Did I still think about that day sometimes? The day he said, "She's my family now," and walked away. The words no longer cut the way they once did. They sit quietly in my memory, like an old photograph. Faded. Still meaningful. But no longer sharp. I see my son differently now. Not as someone who left me, but as someone learning how to live a life I once wanted for him. And I see myself differently too. Not as someone forgotten, but as someone who gave love freely, without keeping score. There are days when I miss him deeply. When I wish for the sound of his voice in the next room. Or the feeling of being needed without asking. Those feelings still come. But they no longer define me. I have learned that motherhood does not end. It simply changes shape. It becomes quieter. Softer. More about wishing well than holding close. If you are listening to this and you feel unseen, I want you to know something. Your love mattered. Your sacrifices mattered. Even if they're not spoken out loud anymore. We are a generation of women who learn to give without asking. To stay strong without showing pain. To smile even when our hearts felt heavy. That strength does not disappear. It becomes wisdom. And sometimes, letting go is not a loss. It is an act of love. I still keep the porch light on. Not because I am waiting. But because love, once given, never truly leaves. It simply learns how to rest.